Welcome back to another episode of What's on My Radar. I'm your host, Meteorologist Reid Kisselback, also, of course, known as Radar Reid. One of the topics that we always get asked about as meteorologists on air is whenever we have big weather coming through, everybody tends to message us and go, oh my gosh, all this damage we just got is like a tornado. A tornado came through. And actually, there's a bunch of different kinds of storms that can cause significant amounts of damage. And joining me today to kind of just walk through some of these is another professor of mine from UAlbany, a fun one that I always enjoyed his classes, is Professor Brian Tang. Brian, thank you for joining us today and taking some time out of your busy schedule. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Reid.
Yeah. And so just for us in general, let's just touch on the month of, really this year so far for us, because typically, with Buffalo reporting another tornado this week. I thought it might be time to just kind of ask you about this. So for 2024, the Severe Weather Risk Communication Center put this out, I think, this morning. There's now been 26 confirmed tornadoes, which broke the old record of 25, which was in 1992. Decent amount of tornadoes, obviously, for us here, but usually our peak is May and June for active weather. So why do you think we're seeing so much more activity this year, especially well beyond our peak?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's one that we'll continue to research and study going forward. But if I were to offer, an hypothesis, it's that we've had a lot of hot, humid weather. So our climate this summer has been more like, the mid-Atlantic. Think about the climate of Washington, D.C. and if you go down there during the summer, it's usually much hotter and more humid down there. So we've had that kind of atmosphere in place, and that provides a lot of instability, a lot of the energy for these thunderstorms we've had this summer. And combined with that, the jet stream has been kind of meandering around our neck of the woods. We've had a weak trough, a weak dip in the jet stream to our west as well. That's provided kind of the lift needed to generate these thunderstorms, these severe thunderstorms, and these storms that can produce tornadoes.
Yeah, we've certainly seen a lot of them too. I'm sure. Did you go out and chase at all on the 10th when we had the 42 warnings?
I did. I went out to the Central Mohawk Valley with my colleague Ross Lazier, who you also know quite well.
You know Ross very well, yeah.
And we intercepted a supercell in southern Oneida County and followed it into Fulton and Montgomery County. It didn't. It was one of the storms that did not produce a tornado, but it had kind of the beautiful classic supercell structure with it.
I'll say from that day, I was working that day with Paul, and I remember just being amazed at the amount of warnings, which was 42 warnings for the entire state that day. But the photos that were coming in of the cells were so picturesque that I was thinking I was looking at photos from like the plains at points if I didn't know better, with some of that structure looking so classic like that.
Exactly. Yeah. It reminded me of chasing out in the plains and the central U.S., which I've done a little bit of.
Yeah. So that can actually lead me into the first question here that I got for you, Brian, on just what some of the different storm types are. We always get these from supercells. So what exactly is a supercell thunderstorm?
Yeah, supercell is basically a rotating thunderstorm. It's when you look at it from radar, oftentimes has a comma or hook-like appearance. Mm-hmm. The hook is where the rotation is, and that's oftentimes if a supercell is going to produce a tornado, that's where it's located. Downwind of the hook, there's this kind of fan out area of heavy rain and hail. And that's, supercells are also known for producing a large hail, sometimes larger than golf balls. And supercells can also produce really strong winds, both on the forward and rear side of the storm.
Very true on that part. I know for us on hail, we don't usually get golf ball size, right? For us, our more rare side is what, quarter size hail?
Yeah, it's uncommon to see hail larger than golf balls. We've had occasionally instances of that occurring in some storms, but usually I would say most of our hail is quarter size to even smaller.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. And so obviously in supercells too, we always talk about tornado development. I got a little graphic on this one, Brian. So if you don't mind, I'll show this really quick here, but I think you're going to like this one too. So we got the surface winds. We have our stronger winds in the upper levels. You get that horizontal rotating column of air as a result. And then eventually what happens is that gets stuck into an updraft. It's the best way to describe this for folks. And eventually that's going to start to lift that column and then put it on its side. So it's now a vertical rotating column of air. The first result that we see usually is our wall cloud at the base of a supercell. And then the funnel cloud, which is what a lot of folks will start to call us and say we have a tornado on the ground. But that's if it's not reaching the ground. And obviously tornado is that funnel cloud, obviously it reaches all the way down to the ground. So that's a big one for us. And I know we use our wind scale with that one as well for the EF scale. I know some people actually ask us about this, Brian, so maybe you can enlighten us a little bit. For the Fujita scale versus enhanced Fujita scale, what exactly was the difference with that?
The enhanced Fujita, there's really not much of a, not really a lot of differences in terms of practical importance. It's just a revision of the scale from the original Fujita scale to the enhanced Fujita scale to update some of the wind speeds necessary to cause some of the damages equivalent for each category.
Gotcha. Okay. That's good to know. I know sometimes people ask us about that. And I know, especially here historically, if you look back, we have the Mechanicsville tornado and people say, oh, it was an F. I forget the number off the top of my head right now, but yeah, it was an F tornado. And then the more recent ones are EF. And they're like, well, what's the difference? So it's a good clarification for us here. What would you say, Brian, in your experience, for a lot of folks when they come up to you and say they think a tornado hit their property or something like that, actually caused that damage? Would you say straight line wind? Would you say microbursts? What would you go for usually?
It's difficult to tell. I certainly don't blame people for saying, a tornado came through, because that's what, I would, if I saw trees down and damage to my property, I would say, oh, it looks like a tornado came through as well. But it is, there are different types of winds that can cause damage. Straight line winds are predominantly winds that blow in a single direction. So oftentimes what that damage looks like, if you have, trees around your property, they all kind of fall in the same direction.
Yeah.
So that's typically the damage you see with straight line wind damage. Tornadoes, on the other hand, are violent rotating columns of air. So
you have it everywhere.
Tornado comes through, right? The wind's blowing from one direction on the front side and then coming around completely the opposite direction on the other side. So the damage caused by tornadoes is a lot more chaotic. You can imagine kind of a tree falling this way first and the tree falling, that way next. So the damage from a tornado is, if we're kind of just sticking to trees, kind of looks like matchsticks kind of all strewn about, kind of all in kind of random patterns.
I always think of like the game like pickup sticks from when you're like super tiny and you just drop them and they all go everywhere. That's tornado damage is how I always view it for myself.
Yeah, definitely.
But that's a good one. You actually beat me to the punch, but straight line wind was one I was going to ask you about, and that's good. Downdraft is another one that gets confused a lot. And like you mentioned too, I don't blame people at all for thinking that, because sometimes it's just so loud and then they come out and they see all those trees. The very first thought, even I would have that, is, did I just have a tornado? I would have to look for a second though, just to try to figure it out for myself. But yeah, can you describe what a downdraft is?
Yeah, a downdraft is, it's basically air below a thunderstorm that descends very rapidly, and it's usually caused by heavy rain evaporating into dry air. That cools the air, kind of like when you get out of a swimming pool and the wind's blowing and you're wet, right? It gets chilly. That's the same thing that happens when rain evaporates into dry air. That air gets cold, it gets dense, and it sinks and it accelerates downwards and it hits the ground. And that's when the air spreads out, you can have really strong winds associated with that. Yeah,
that sounds. It ties into a microburst, downburst, and just macroburst. But I mean, downburst kind of just collects all of them into one group there for sure. Do you have one of particular memory that really stuck out to you?
Oh gosh, I do remember there was one in Guilderland. I forget how it was actually a macroburst, which we
Yeah.
have all these names. The scientists always have categories for a lot of different things, and I forget what year it was, but it did cause quite a bit of damage, sort of in the Guilderland area, and gosh, yeah, I would have to look back and see what.
No, that's all right. Hey, I mean, if it sticks out, it sticks out. There's certainly, I think everybody has one really intense storm where they get a lot of damage that they can think of. I mean, Edinburgh right now sticks out to me just because all of our reporters keep coming back and you're like, it's still bad out there.
Oh yeah,
where the damage is, and that's I believe they said it was microburst that caused that.
The storm that occurred in Edinburgh in mid-July.
Yeah,
actually, that's actually a really good example because I was on Lake Sacandaga about a week after that happened.
Okay.
And we sailed north of the bridge, close between Edinburgh and Northville.
Yeah.
And you can actually see all the trees down along the coast.
One direction. Yeah.
And there's a hillside where the trees were just completely flattened and mowed down. It was quite a sight to behold.
Yeah, that's it's certainly a big one that sticks out for sure. Can you talk about also, I got a couple more for you for different kinds of weather systems that could cause some of this damage. So a gust front.
Yeah, a gust front is a kind of a rush of cold air that can occur ahead of a squall line or any thunderstorm really. And it's that same cold air that's caused by evaporation of rain, and it pushes out ahead of the thunderstorm. So when a thunderstorm oftentimes is approaching and you're outside, you feel that initial shift in wind, the temperature drops. That's the gust front hitting, and that's kind of the signal that the thunderstorms are really close to arriving.
Gotcha. So with a gust front, necessarily, do you get intense winds, or you can just get some pretty strong winds of maybe 30, 40 miles an hour?
It varies.
Yeah.
Most gust fronts are kind of in that 30 mile per hour range, not really causing a lot of damage, maybe some, small branches down.
I think I've been out live in a couple of those ones where you can feel it get very breezy, and then you're like, it's way cooler behind it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's kind of like nature's air conditioning.
Yeah, I like that one. I'm not complaining usually because it's usually in the summertime when they send me out for those ones. So, you mentioned the term, Brian, in here that I was going to ask you about too. I mean, the broadcast meteorologists, we have time to explain things, but we don't have a lot of time sometimes. But squall line is one term that we definitely have used before, and I've tried to explain to viewers before. But in your best words, can you define what a squall line is?
Yeah, a squall line is basically a group of thunderstorms arranged into a line. It's a little bit self-explanatory.
I would say it's like an intense line of storms. Sometimes you have like some supercells embedded into it, and
it's like almost like an army of thunderstorms. Sort of a line. They can sometimes extend hundreds of miles. So they're on radar. They're very distinct.
Yeah.
And they, as you mentioned, the gust front, they oftentimes have a strong gust front, and that gust front helps to lift the air, kind of like a plow, like a kind of a snow plow coming through and lifting the air, and it helps generate new thunderstorms along the leading line and keeps the squall line kind of pushing forward.
Yeah, those are always impressive to watch on radar. And then as the reports start to come in, you get more impressed with what's happening on the ground from those too. Can you actually talk about maybe a little bit of a difference then? Because I know some folks will probably get this messed up now with a squall line and a derecho. Can you define what a derecho is? Yeah.
So a derecho, I would say, is a type of squall line, but it's a squall line that's particularly long-lived and unusually severe, and it produces widespread damage along its path. I think there's a specific definition for a squall line to meet derecho status, and that is it has to extend a certain distance. I think over 200 miles. Or
240 miles.
240 miles.
Sorry, I got the paper right here with the definition on it. As I look down, I'm like, oh, hey, there it is. Yeah.
and there has to be significant wind gusts basically along its duration. So
Yeah, 58 miles an hour or greater along
yes.
most of its length. Yeah.
So if it meets those criteria, then it's classified as a derecho.
Got it. Yeah, it's a good way to clarify it apart, because I know a lot of people are going to be, if you think of a squall line, you never hear necessarily derecho with it, but if you hear derecho, sometimes squall line does get mentioned in that mix,
Mm-hmm.
and so people will start to get those two a little bit more interchange. What's your favorite type of severe weather?
Oh gosh, I mean, I do. I mean, if I were to pick a favorite, I would say, of the types of severe weather that are great as research interests. I never kind of root for severe weather.
No, I'm right there with you. I think it's, for meteorologists, we always have to clarify, right? We don't actually want it to happen.
Yeah.
But from a meteorological standpoint of getting to observe something, this would be my favorite. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by how hail forms, large hail, and certainly tornadoes. I've been interested since I was young. I grew up in Denver, Front Range of the Rockies, a lot of hail, tornadoes on the high plains. I just remember growing up as a kid, just wondering, what the heck causes these things, and that has remained a research interest as I've become a atmospheric scientist.
Yeah, I mean, that's always cool. I feel like every meteorologist you ask, they have a storm or a specific just weather event that has just made them want to go down this route, or just, I guess, where you grow up too, and the repeated patterns gets that curiosity going, which is always cool to see. Being that you're out in Colorado, I got to ask you now, you ever encounter any dust storms?
Oh yeah, some of my earliest memories were dust storms. They would kind of it's sort of like a gust front out there. It'd be calm, and the next moment there would be really strong gusty winds outside, and the dust would blow in from the basically usually north of the city, from the high plains into the city. Yeah. And I remember some of my earliest memories were those kind of big dust storms that would cause huge shifts in weather in Denver. Yeah. That's probably one of the reasons I got interested in weather.
Yeah, no, I mean, that'd be a cool one to get curious about. And I'm going to have to ask you, Brian, just because from a viewer standpoint, you ever see Mission Impossible? What is it, Rogue Nation, where they have the dust storm scene in it? Is it like that, or is it not?
I haven't seen that movie, so I can't say.
Okay.
But I'm sure Hollywood can work its magic. And
we got Tom Cruise doing a whole foot chase through the middle of a dust storm. It's intense. So if you ever catch the movie, let me know what you think, and I'll let everybody else know on the podcast.
I'll put it on my list.
Well, yeah, thanks, Brian, again for taking the time to talk with us. We really appreciate it, and you certainly have shed some light on the differences for a lot of folks. So I really appreciate it. And I know I'm going to see you soon at some point anyway. So appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day, Brian.
Thanks, Reid. Good to see you, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Well, everybody, thank you again for watching What's on My Radar here. Again, I'm Meteorologist Reid Kisselback. We'll be back again with some more episodes coming up soon, so we'll hope to see you then.